5 things that are helpful tips if you're in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant and you're trying to make it work. Leslie Wells, connection coach. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve, repair, and connect more deeply in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. Let me preface this by saying I am not asking anyone to change who they inherently are or to betray your own needs and desires. I'm not asking you to become a chameleon and show up completely differently than who you are. What I am saying is that if we are with a partner and we are in a committed relationship or very invested or you're married, then it makes sense to consider the impact of how you approach your partner on your partner, to consider the things that you say, how you approach them, to create a safe environment for them. I'm not telling anyone to betray themselves. I'm not telling anyone to become someone completely different, to exhaust themselves by walking on eggshells around their partner. What I am saying is it's very reasonable, if you deeply love and care for someone, to try to show up in ways that feel good for them, to consider your impact on them, and to show up well for them. Because I know I'm always going to get the pushback with, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to change everything just for the dismissive avoidant. Not asking you to do that. So the very first thing is your communication. It needs to be very clear and very direct, and it needs to be done in a way that does not feel critical. None of us like being criticized. Nobody likes feeling attacked or getting feedback that's negative. It feels bad for all of us. Now, some of us have the tools and the skills to be able to sit in those spaces a little bit longer and self-reflect, unlike the DA typically. However, it doesn't feel good to anyone. So it makes sense that it's really hard for them as well. So that doesn't mean, again, that you walk on eggshells and you don't ever complain to them or ever tell them any needs that you have or give them any feedback that you have in the relationship. Instead, there's a different way to do it. So do it in a non-critical way, and so many people come across critically and don't realize it. They come across with feedback in a you did this or you did that thing. They come at it with you always or you never, or they say it in a way that really makes the other person feel bad. It comes across with a tone or nagging or whatever. So a way that you can do that for your dismissive avoidant is to tell them what they do well, and then to tell them what you desire more of, and then to get their buy-in and be very specific about what it looks like for you. So dismissive avoidants really like to please and appease and actually like to feel very good and accomplished at things. A lot of times they get a lot of their external validation through their accomplishment and showing up well and doing things. So although they often do not show up well because they lack emotional intelligence, they desire to show up well for you. So what that might look like is, if you want more quality time with your dismissive avoidant, then you say, hey, when we first started dating a couple of months ago or a couple of years ago or whenever, when we first started dating, it really felt good to me how much time you spent with me and how you would plan date nights. And I love the fact that it just made me feel so valued and so cherished. And I really desire more of that. I would love it if we could get back to that, because it just made me feel so good. Or it was something that you just did really well. Do you think we can make that happen? So get their buy-in, and then be specific about what that looks like. Quality time for me looks like a date night once a week that you plan and you make happen. It looks like 2 hours electronics put down of one-on-one time, even if it's just at our house and we're actually talking rather than doing shoulder-to-shoulder time. Be specific. If you give them specifics and you give them direction and you give them a roadmap, they are much more likely to show up well for you. The next thing is space. Number 2 is space. They like their autonomy. They are one of their biggest fears. And one of the things that triggers them is this fear that they are going to lose their autonomy in a relationship, and they're going to be so enmeshed in that relationship that they don't also have their own outside life. So give them space for hobbies, for friends, for time away from you. That does not mean space in the form of you guys get into an argument and they disappear and ghost you for a week with no communication, or even 48 hours without saying, hey, I need space to process this, calm down, can we come back to this conflict? Not talking about that, but give them time to go explore their own world and have a time and friends and hobbies apart from you. If you really want to do things even better for your DA, make sure you're doing those things for yourself. If you're with a dismissive avoidant, you probably have some anxious attachment, and this is actually really crucial for your healing work and you earning secure attachment. So go spend some time with your own friends, do your own hobby, do something that you enjoy in those times where they're taking that space for themselves. That's a healthy dynamic in a relationship. But really let them know that them having their time to do their thing that makes them feel good is a priority to you. That does not mean that you don't put boundaries around them prioritizing those things above the relationship. But do let them know that it's a priority for you, for them to be able to have that space because you know it's important to them. With space is number 3, and that is time to process. Dismissive avoidants are very slow processors. In conflict, in a hard conversation, in something that requires a lot of vulnerability for them, they really struggle. They will get to this place and where they go into a trauma response of flight or freeze, and a lot of times just can't process right then and there on the spot, or they feel attacked, or they go into that defectiveness wound and they're terrified of how they're going to show up. So if you're having a conversation and you can see that they're sort of slipping away and they're kind of going into that avoidance side, then give them space to process. Pause the conversation and say, hey, I can see that this is getting uncomfortable for you. Do you need some time and space to process? And then we can come back to this and we can pick it back up in an hour or two, or we can pick it back up in the morning, and then allow them that space to process. You really will see that a lot of times if they have that space to process, when you revisit the conversation as they're learning to be safer in these conversations and show up with more vulnerability, that space will really allow them time to think, to actually self-reflect as they're growing in their capacity to do that, and to be able to have a better conversation the next time around. Give them that space. Also put boundaries around that space for conflict resolution. If you give them that space, there is the understanding, and you need to set a boundary around, we have to come back to this and resolve it within a timely manner. But self-regulation is extremely important for dismissive avoidant. That's the only way they know how to regulate. And so giving them that space first to self-regulate will help them show up and co-regulate with you better later on. If you push for an immediate response, or you push them too hard to be vulnerable and to show up when you're very emotional, they're going to shut down and you're going to feel abandoned and you are going to spiral as a result of that. The fourth thing is respond, don't react. If you are anxiously attached, then make sure that you come at them first after self-regulating a little bit, something you're probably going to need to work on, and then show up without all the emotional reactivity. Show up in a calm, collected manner where you're not being triggered, and then come with that non-critical communication for them. And make sure that whenever you are responding to them, you're considering their lack of capacity, that you're considering, instead of taking things personal, that when they start to need more space to process, or when they're starting to shut down, that is a them issue. That is a lack of capacity. It is not the fact that they don't care. So recognize that they have a lack of capacity in some areas, and that there's some things that they just don't have the tools to do yet, and that they're learning. And so don't take it personally. If you take it personally, then you are going to show much higher emotional reactivity, and that is going to further shut them down. It's not going to create a safe space for them to show up vulnerably, which is ultimately what you desire, is more connection and more safety in the relationship, which requires vulnerability and them showing up authentically. They cannot do that if you show up with all these emotions that they don't know how to hold space for, because they're learning, if they're learning and hopefully doing their work, to even hold space for their own emotions. It's really important in these moments that you come with curiosity instead of defensiveness or getting louder to be seen and heard. If you're anxiously attached, one of your core needs is to be seen, heard, and understood, but getting louder, getting bigger, getting uglier is going to have the opposite impact on the dismissive avoidant. And the fifth thing is a little bit more you focused, but it does impact the dismissive avoidant. The fifth thing is check the stories that you are writing in your own mind around their behavior. Stop making assumptions and writing stories that may not fit the actual narrative that is happening. An example that I just gave a minute ago is whenever they start to shut down and pull away, is assuming that it's because they don't care, they don't love you, they're not interested. All of those things are stories that you're writing in your own head. You're not recognizing that they truly are in a trauma response and they lack capacity. It's not that they don't want to show up good for you. All of the dismissive avoidants that I work with deeply care about their partners and deeply are impacted by the hurt that they cause in their relationships and want to do better. They simply do not know how. Once they start getting the tools, they do start to show up better, and they are learning these things, and they're able to sit in spaces whereas before they could not. So check the stories that you're writing about your dismissive avoidant. If they do not respond to you right away in a text, it's not because they're up to no good, or they don't care, or you're not a priority. They don't think the same way that anxiously attached people do. If they come home late and forget to call you, it's because they're used to their autonomy and they sort of have emotional blinders. So they stay in their old world and they don't necessarily think outside of themselves yet. That's a tool that somebody has to learn either through modeling or teaching. They literally miss some of those neuroconnections to be able to see outside of themselves. So where you start writing all these stories about what their behavior means and drawing meaning from it and making these assumptions, it's often wrong. You're creating more suffering for yourself. And then the dismissive avoidant doesn't even know how to respond to that because they're not thinking that way. So a lot of times they're utterly confused when you've written a story, and it's very frustrating from them that you've already made all of these determinations about them when that is not in fact their true and real internal experience. So there you have it, 5 things to consider so you can show up better for your dismissive avoidant partner. If you're with a dismissive avoidant partner and it is making you more anxious, I do coaching with people who are struggling with anxious attachment. If you are the dismissive avoidant and you recognize how your behaviors are starting to impact your partner, or some of these things resonate with you, I work with a lot of dismissive avoidants, and there definitely is help and hope for you.